The idea that the Jedi were peacekeepers endures largely because it is repeated, not because it is demonstrated, and when their actual pattern of involvement is examined without mythic framing, a very different picture emerges, one where the Order consistently appears not at the beginning of conflict, but at the point where failure is already imminent and violence is already unfolding. Jedi deployments almost never begin with long-term mediation or preventative presence. They begin with alarms already sounding, with blockades in place, invasions underway, or hostages taken, positioning the Jedi not as architects of peace, but as last resort responders sent to contain damage rather than avert it. This pattern is established immediately in Star Wars Episode I: The Phantom Menace, where the Jedi are dispatched to Naboo only after economic coercion has escalated into a full-scale blockade, and their role is not to negotiate policy or resolve grievances, but to break an impasse that has already turned hostile. The very framing of that mission reveals the Jedi function clearly. They are sent because normal diplomatic channels have failed, because trust is gone, and because the situation has crossed the threshold where force-backed authority is required to impose order rather than cultivate agreement. Throughout the prequel era, Jedi appearances follow this same rhythm, arriving mid-crisis rather than pre-crisis, stepping into moments of collapse rather than stability, and treating escalation as the default context for engagement rather than an outcome to be avoided through sustained presence. This is why so many Jedi introductions open with weapons drawn or force powers already in use, because the Order is not embedded within communities to resolve tension before it explodes, but deployed surgically when explosions are already inevitable, reinforcing their association with intervention rather than harmony. Even figures often remembered as diplomats, such as Qui-Gon Jinn, are most frequently shown navigating active danger rather than slow negotiation, operating under time pressure and threat, which prioritizes decisive action over patient reconciliation. The Clone Wars only make this reality more explicit, stripping away any remaining ambiguity about the Jedi role as they transition fully into battlefield commanders, generals by necessity, embedded within military hierarchies that define success through victory rather than stability. In Star Wars: The Clone Wars, Jedi are almost never shown preventing wars from starting. They are shown managing wars already in progress, leading troops, planning offensives, and reacting to enemy action, a portrayal that aligns far more closely with crisis response than peacekeeping. This matters because crisis responders are fundamentally reactive by design. Their mandate is containment and resolution under pressure, not prevention, not community trust building, and not long-term institutional repair, all of which require time, continuity, and local legitimacy the Jedi rarely possessed. The Jedi authority therefore comes not from governance or representation, but from emergency trust, a conditional mandate granted by the Republic in moments of desperation, where the alternative to force intervention is total collapse, making consent situational rather than enduring. To populations on the receiving end, this distinction is critical, because the Jedi do not arrive as neighbours or mediators. They arrive as enforcers, backed by overwhelming power, often appearing indistinguishable from military assets, even when their intentions are sincere. When a robed figure with a lightsaber enters a crisis zone, the symbolism is not neutral. It communicates that the situation has escalated beyond normal politics into exceptional measures, and exceptional measures are rarely perceived as peaceful by those subjected to them. Over time, this repeated association normalizes force-backed intervention as a solution, embedding the idea that peace is restored not through addressing underlying grievances, but through decisive suppression of immediate threats, a logic that reinforces cycles of instability rather than resolving them. Calling the Jedi peacekeepers therefore obscures their actual structural role, which is closer to that of a rapid response unit deployed at the breaking point, effective at ending battles but ill-suited to preventing them, and judged successful because the fighting stops rather than because peace endures. This misunderstanding lays the groundwork for later disillusionment, because when peace fails to last, blame is assigned to the Jedi for not achieving what they were never designed to do, masking the deeper systemic failures that made their intervention necessary in the first place. Seen clearly, the Jedi did not fail at peace, They fulfilled a narrow mandate repeatedly and consistently, responding to crisis with discipline and force, and the tragedy is not that they were ineffective peacekeepers, but that the galaxy mistook emergency response for sustainable harmony. Once the Jedi are understood as crisis responders rather than peace architects, the consequences of their role snap into focus, because reaction and prevention are not adjacent functions. They are structurally opposed, and confusing one for the other creates expectations no institution can realistically meet. Peacekeeping in its truest form is slow, local, and often invisible, built through sustained presence, trust cultivation, economic stabilization, and early de-escalation, all of which require patience, political legitimacy, and accountability to the people affected, none of which define how the Jedi were deployed across the Republic. The Jedi did not live among worlds long enough to become part of their social fabric. They arrived suddenly, acted decisively, and departed once the immediate threat was neutralized, a pattern that resolves symptoms while leaving causes intact, ensuring that conflict pauses rather than ends. This reactive posture inevitably shaped how the Force itself was perceived, because when power only appears at moments of collapse, it becomes associated not with harmony, but with coercion, turning the Jedi into symbols of enforcement rather than guardians of balance, regardless of their intentions. To a Senate chamber, a Jedi is reassurance, a sign that order will be restored. But to a population under occupation, blockade, or military oversight, a Jedi is an escalation marker, proof that politics has failed and exceptional force has arrived to impose resolution. This is why the Jedi reputation fractures so sharply along lines of power, admired by those who summon them and distrusted by those who experience them, because authority rooted in emergency is inherently asymmetrical, granted from above and imposed downward. Over time, this dynamic normalizes the idea that peace is something delivered at the point of a lightsaber rather than cultivated through justice, subtly teaching the galaxy that stability arrives only after violence peaks, reinforcing cycles of escalation rather than interrupting them. The Clone Wars expose this flaw completely, because once the Jedi are embedded permanently in crisis, they lose even the illusion of neutrality, becoming indistinguishable from the Republic's military apparatus, generals who fight wars rather than monks who prevent them. At that point, the title of peacekeeper becomes not just inaccurate, but actively misleading, a rhetorical shield that obscures how far the order has drifted from balance into institutionalized reaction, where success is measured by battles won rather than suffering avoided. This distinction matters profoundly when evaluating the Jedi collapse, because it reframes their failure away from moral corruption and towards structural misalignment, an order built to intervene, at the breaking point being asked to maintain a peace that required continuous, preventative care. The galaxy did not lose its peace because the Jedi fell. The Jedi fell because the galaxy mistook emergency responders for peace builders, outsourcing stability to an institution designed for containment rather than transformation. Figures like Obi-Wan Kenobi and Mace Windu become tragic within this framework, not because they were hypocrites, but because they operated faithfully within a mandate that could never achieve what the galaxy believed it represented. Even the Council's rigidity begins to make more sense when seen through this lens, because institutions optimize for crisis favor control, clarity, and decisiveness over ambiguity and empathy, traits that stabilize emergencies but calcify into blindness over time. By the end, the Jedi are not failing at peacekeeping. They are succeeding too well at crisis management, perpetually reacting, perpetually intervening, and perpetually arriving just late enough that violence feels inevitable, reinforcing the very conditions that justify their deployment. This is why the accusation that the Jedi lost their way often feels unsatisfying, because it implies deviation rather than design, when the deeper truth is that they performed exactly the function they were structurally built to perform, and that function was never peace maintenance in the first place. The myth of the Jedi as peacekeepers persists because it is comforting, because it suggests that harmony can be restored by extraordinary individuals rather than sustained by ordinary systems, and because it allows the Republic to externalize responsibility for peace onto a monastic order rather than its own governance failures. In reality, the Jedi were a tourniquet applied to a bleeding galaxy, Effective in the moment, indispensable in emergencies, but incapable of healing wounds, they were never permitted a treat at the source. When that tourniquet finally failed, the collapse was catastrophic. Not because the Jedi were evil or incompetent, but because no amount of emergency intervention can substitute for justice, equity, and trust built before crisis erupts. Understanding this reframes the fall of the Jedi not as a moral cautionary tale about hubris, but as a systemic warning about confusing reaction with prevention, force with peace, and intervention with harmony. The Jedi did not betray peace. They were never tasked with building it. And the tragedy of their story is that the galaxy demanded an impossible role, then condemned them for failing to fulfill it.
Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that share button. My main channel is Critical Analysis Hub, where I post Star Wars content about the movies. My secondary channel is Critical Analysis Hub Plus, where I focus on the shows of Star Wars. And my third channel is Critical Analysis Hub XP, where I post comic books. Be sure to take a moment and check them out. Thanks, and may the Force be with you.